Welcome to Wickerson Studios. Michael Wickerson here, and I am slowly moving away from depending on Visual Studio Code with Copilot. I've decided to pay a little extra, and Copilot was $10 a month. I was getting that free as an educator, so that's nice. But I'm going to go on the GPT-4 and see if I can't get my employer to pay for me to use that. But if you're interested in what I might do with GPT-4, away from hops and directly into something much more familiar to many people that have done well with Grasshopper, and that is the C# script or the ghpython script. You can choose whichever one you want to use. I'm going to choose ghpython script to start, and I am going to use GPT-4. You'll see that I'm over here in model GPT-4. I could have done 3.5, but this one is absolutely incredible. So I've got here a very simple geometry, but actually if you consider having to make that from scratch in Grasshopper, it would take a few nodes, a little bit of spaghetti. You'd be wrapping it around and stuff like that. And what I want to do is just make this a little larger and show you that let's get going on a geometry from a very simple prompt. And I'll show you the process of how I did it. So this one is actually this code, which is a little more complex. I'm going to close it up now. So I do things in iterations. And this is the code that I'm actually going to bring in. And we don't really need to look at this one. Just assume that anything that I get working over here, I will copy that and I will paste it into this area. So we really don't need to be looking at that all the time. But the only problem is that I don't like about the interface is when I hit OK and that one closes. Every time I want to open that to relook at it again, oh, it is popping right back up where it was. So that's very nice. So we're just going to continue to update down here. And so we'll hit OK. So I want to build a very simple bridge. So that's exactly what I typed. The darker set here is what I'm typing. Create a bridge architecture in Python for Grasshopper 3D. It's already been done enough times, or can conceive of people asking for that to happen. And then it gives you this whole thing like it wants to talk to you. I honestly don't even read any of this. I just go right down to the code. I don't even read the code. I hit copy. I hit copy, and when I hit copy, before I open it in Grasshopper, in the ghpython node, which won't look like this, it will look like this. And it won't look like this because I'll have to add arguments. I know length is going to be a float, width is going to be a float, height is going to be a float. I know there's going to be item access. I don't have to do list access. And I want divisions, which will be an integer. So basically, I add these in by naming them, setting the type hint to what I want, and leaving it as item access. Go through each one and do that. Bang, 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 bang. So step one, get your node up and running. At the same time, copy the create truss bridge name and forget the icon. Just send it over to a readable icon. And that's it, if you consider that an icon, which technically it is a very long icon of white on black background. Run it. Put in some inputs that might work. Play around with it. If you look at the script, it will tell you what it wants those to be. So I could go in here and set this one to 100. And I could set this one to 10. And I could set this one to 20. But it doesn't really matter because it's going to override these inputs because I've hard-coded the call function to create truss bridge to these numbers. So if you want to have a parametric model, just keep in mind that you have to go into this script and comment that line out. But I'm not going to. I'm going to be satisfied that it's up and running. It takes my inputs, it overrides them, and gives me a geometry. And it worked. Step one, it worked. And I immediately took a look at it. This is a simple example. This is when I go back and read it because I'm not happy with the output. So I'll read it. And it says a few things, but what it says at the end is even better. So I don't read the stuff before it scripts, but here it is. Here's the code of the simple truss. It'll output A as bridge. So there's your very simple bridge. But please note this code is highly simplified and doesn't include any construction of support pillars or complex structural features. So I didn't really pay attention to that initially. I went right on to the coding section and I read the next line. And it says, for more complex models, which is what I want, you might want to use the Rhino Common SDK. So use a more advanced feature of the Rhino Common SDK. And I cut that directly from here. So I'm speaking with it. It's much more polite than me, ChatGPT-4. So it says, here's a more detailed script. Immediately, I don't read that. I take the code, I see if anything else came in as inputs. It still used the same 4 length, width, height divisions, so I didn't have to change anything there. And it hard-coded it in at the end at the same numbers that were there. But when I plugged it in, it didn't work. And if it did work, maybe this one did. I think that, no, I didn't do cylinders. This one worked again. And it made a little more complex model than what was there initially. But then I went back to what it was saying before up here. I also ignored that it could do better support pillars or more complex geometries. So I simply cut and paste that here, but I said, make support pillars and more complex geometry. So I thought, instead of or, let's go for the and. It immediately drew up a script. But as you can see here, which is hard to see, you've got to scan over right here to see what's cropped off. You'll see that it added a pillar radius and a beam radius. Because they're radii, I had no problem starting a new node that hopefully would work, but it didn't work. But I added my 2. I went in and I set my type hint to floats, item access. I also looked down at the bottom to what it was recommending. It added a 1 and a 0.5, so I set that to that. Even though I played around with these a little bit, I should probably just to, and I like using edit snapping a lot, since it wanted 0.5, I'll probably let it snap to that. Beep. And since this one wanted, I won't do it on the other ones because they can play around with a little bit. You can have 110, 20, 10. It doesn't really matter exactly. But this one, snapping, it seemed to want 1. So I'll put in my snapping. So then I can snap that back to 1. And you can also adjust the scale of these, edit your number sliders. And you can name them and say whatever they want. But they're kind of named right over here. So what does it matter? So you've got this weird pillar, but it didn't work. And all I did, and if you remember Python, I can't really show this to people that aren't common users. There's a little red flag will come up here because it won't have an output. And it said create instance takes almost, at most 2 arguments for given. But it didn't say which instance. So I looked around through the script and I found out the thing asking for 4 things was, let me pop this back to where it was. It was the cylinder. And the cylinder wasn't working. It was asking for 4 things. I didn't like that. So as I jumped in here, let me try and get this to slide back over. I got to go down a bit. And that's why I had it over. It's asking for 4 things. And I don't need 4 things. I need it to fix itself. And the error message, when I asked it to fix it, it forgot its initial code. It just forgot what we were working on. It gave me some weird example. And I said, yeah. And then it gave me a generalized approach. I said, okay, here's the code. I had to cut and paste back in the code we're talking about. And immediately it apologizes like a real person that works for me. I'm sorry on the earlier confusion. Blah, 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 blah. Fix it up. It still gave me a red flag. The next red flag, I said fix, line object has no midpoint. Immediately it apologizes for the confusion, finds the midpoint of the lines, generates another script. And at that point, I was misunderstanding the hard coding down here because I'm not used to calling functions over in the ghpython. I just run them through the ghpython node. So I was like, well, you got to make sure you use the length and height and everything like that. Well, they were. They weren't working parametrically because this was overriding my inputs. So all I had to do after I read a little bit of this and was confusing myself for a little bit, it just clicked in my mind that, oh, I just have to go back into the script itself. And what I've been doing the whole time is cutting and pasting it over into this node. I should have said that. And at the end, all I did was take those hard-coded numbers and put right back in my arguments at the end and made a call. And if you do that, you're right back in business. This is liquid gold. This is the complete game changer to how you might build geometries from text. And I think GPT-4 is the answer. You have to have some knowledge what you're doing. You probably want to know a little bit of the Rhino Common SDK. You probably want to just at least know how to read through here and know when it's talking to you and what it's telling you to do. But if you become a cobot to this, if you actually become the human and the sensitivity and decision maker between the AI that's being performed and then what you're outputting here, I'm going to continue with this model. And I'm going to continue this series today. I think some people will be interested in seeing how it's developed. And I'm going to keep running this. And of course, what's nice about it is it archives my stuff over a way as Python Trust Bridge. And there's a project there that's ongoing. It's dialogue. I could add to it. I'm allowed to do 25 calls every 3 hours. I guess that's 25 projects. I don't think it's just 25 calls. But we are ready to go. And let's take a look. We've got parametric models working wonderful for us that are scripted in one node by GPT-4. I'm not even going to say Chat GPT anymore, even though it is a Chat GPT. I'm changing the heights, the trusses, the numbers, and the call that's been gone out to build a bridge project. This is the one I'm actually going to do. So I'm going to just kill this for a second, stop recording, send this on, and